Hey viewers, Simon here. What you are about to see today is really important. We are presenting you with facts about how the human body is affected by non-ionizing radiation from the highly strange. As a science researcher, that's an extremely odd subject. Why would the CIA, the military, the medical community actually be interested in somebody's UFO encounter? Well, it's all in how it affects them. There are hundreds of cases of people here on Earth who have had encounters with stuff we as yet don't understand. And that's the point. John Burroughs and others who have had close encounters with the highly strange are deeply affected. It's encoded in their body. You can tell what it was that they were too close to because the clues are still inside them. So that's what really fascinates me, and that's why John Burroughs is so important. Hidden inside his body, in his memory, in his actual DNA, is evidence of what he encountered. So follow real data. Forget the woohoo theories and look at the evidence. The CIA, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Gary Nolan and Dr. Kit Green know that John Burroughs and others are the clue to really understanding the origin of UAP. If you, like me, want to unlock that mystery, understand what's really going on, you come to the right place, because we're presenting you not woohoo theories, but real data. So here today is the real medical evidence for the weaponization of UAP.
These things are real, they're here, this is happening now.
A light appeared, and like a blue bar of light hovering over the road. On one side, witnesses could see it. On the other side, they couldn't see anything.
Our night that we went out there, they were blasting the phenomenon with EM frequencies from Bowsy through the tunnels into the forest. Because those blue lights that we saw, plasmas being targeted by lasers. They were generating the phenomenon, which was probably what they were hitting was the actual phenomenon, the exposure, what they created from blasting this energy.
They got immediately merged into UFOs, and I'm not sure what UFOs are, but these aren't spacecraft. These aren't extraterrestrial.
High-power radars and ionospheric heaters are capable of making atmospheric plasmas. Now, these are glowing balls of light, like ball lightning. They can move from speeds that are stationary to many thousands of miles an hour. They will follow Earth energy gradients. If they're artificial, if it's by radar sweep, then they may be swept across the sky in regular or intelligent patterns.
We have now released Plan Quick Strike. Repeat, we have now released Plan Quick Strike.
We will deep dive into the world of UAP. Past to the present, some considerations, historical accounts, possibilities, and some personal perspectives on a substantial number of UAP issues. Some involve close encounters with UAP and the effects on human beings. Add up threat assessment, weaponizing UAPs, and the race to be the first to do it, and we have a lot to unpack in this edition, The Weaponization of UAP. I invite you to dig deeper, leave no stone unturned, to discover the indisputable truth to the tough questions regarding UAP. A shoe that fits. In an interview on Coast to Coast AM in March of 2013, Las Vegas businessman and space entrepreneur Robert Bigelow explained the essential conundrum that has stymied the UFO investigative community since the 1950s. Host George Knapp. This is not as simple as aliens coming from another planet, coming here in a flying saucer and landing on Earth. It's a lot more complicated than that. Bigelow. Far more complicated than that. Far more. These complications require a lot of time to get into. There is book after book after book that are written about narrow slices of aspects of the phenomena that deal with consciousness and that kind of thing. The basis of Bigelow's remarks is the phenomenon varies in presentation to the rational mind across time and according to the cultural presets of the specific mind that encounters it. It appears out of seemingly elsewhere, defies classical physics, leaves a deep impression upon the observer, and then returns to from whence it came, leaving wonder, confusion, awe, bewilderment, and scant evidence in its wake. Forensic neuroimaging expert Christopher Green says he dealt with hundreds of patients who were injured or died after interacting with UFOs. I'm the go-to physician in the Department of Defense for unexplained morbidity and mortality, he told DailyMail.com in an exclusive interview. I do look at injuries and mortality from unidentified UAPs, he added. Green, a professor at the Wayne State School of Medicine in Detroit, was in 2010 commissioned to write a paper about a secret $22 million defense program. He described symptoms of multiple sclerosis, brain damage, and burns among patients from close encounters of the third and fourth kind events. He said symptoms of many of these cases were similar to Havana syndrome, a mysterious illness affecting diplomats and U.S. officials and embassies around the world. Green said many of his patients experienced burns and brain damage, and that 1 in 10 died within 7 years of their reported encounter. A disturbing UFO injury case investigated under the DIA's USAF contract was described in an October 2021 book co-authored by two of the program's managers. A 48-year-old biotechnologist, given the pseudonym Ron Becker by the authors, told USAF investigators he was with his daughter driving 50 miles southeast of Bend, Oregon in May of 2005 when they saw 3 blue orbs flying in a field about 100 yards away. The father and daughter told OSAP manager and book co-author Colm Kellier that as they watched, the softball-sized orbs flew towards them and through their vehicle, one passing through Becker's arm and chest. In the days after, Becker felt dizzy and nauseous, began losing hair, and started losing his sight and hearing. Blood tests over the next 2 years showed severe abnormalities, and he was diagnosed with a rare cancer in his chest. An unclassified version of Dr. Green's paper titled Clinical, Medical, Acute, and Subacute Field Effects on Human Dermal and Neurological Tissues was released last year under the Freedom of Information Act and described symptoms of multiple sclerosis, brain damage, and burns sustained by patients from CE3, CE4 close encounter events. An apparent reference to interactions with and even abductions by UFOs. The news comes after Congress approved funding in December for an official government UFO monitoring program, which will include an assessment of any health-related effects for individuals that may have encountered unidentified aerial phenomena. And earlier this week, a newly released report from a shadowy Pentagon program that closed in 2012 similarly revealed that the U.S. intelligence officials have evidence that UFO sightings have led to adverse health effects like radiation burns, paralysis, and even brain damage. Dr. Green said he became the go-to expert for military patients who had out-of-this-world experiences backed up by witnesses and radar data, including cases of big silent drones which hovered and moved in odd ways, showed emanations of funny lights, patterns, and strobes, and even cloaked or changed shape and instantaneously appeared and disappeared. Anomalous acute and subacute field effects on human biological tissues, Dr. Green. To give but one hypothesis with regard to exotic mechanisms, there is the possibility that those are effects predicted by general relativity theory that would correlate with some of the reported data in which the black body heat spectrum of an object would be blue shifted under conditions of space-time manipulation for lift and propulsion. Were a human exposed to blue shifting at relatively close range, symptoms associated with broadband radiation, microwave, visible UV, and soft X-rays could be expected. Medical data supports this option. That is, mixed non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation causes microwave tissue heating and also disruption of clones of white blood cells to cause cessation of cell division. Many of the descriptions of injuries and biological effects from radio waves and microwaves appeared as far back as 1976 in a report from the Defense Intelligence Agency titled The Biological Effects of Electromagnetic Radiation, Eurasian Communist Countries. In part, it also states that if the more advanced nations of the West are strict in the enforcement of stringent exposure standards, there could be favorable effects on industrial output and military functions. Could any of this information relate to the 1977 Brazilian island of Colares incident, from which witnesses described light beams coming down from the sky, along with different balls of light? 35 people were hurt and 2 people died after encountering beams and mysterious balls of light. Paralysis and burns were reported by numerous witnesses, as well as vision impairment. Emerging cognitive neuroscience and related technologies from the National Research Council identifies and explores several specific research areas that have implications for U.S. national security and should therefore be monitored consistently by the intelligence community. These ideas include neurophysiological advances in detecting and measuring indicators of physiological states and intentions of individuals. Number 2, the development of drugs and technologies that can alter human physical and cognitive abilities. And 3, advances in real-time brain imaging. 4, breakthroughs in high-performance computing and neuronal modeling that could allow researchers to develop systems which mimic functions of the human brain, particularly the ability to organize disparate forms of data. As these fields continue to grow, it will be imperative that the intelligence community be able to identify specific advances relevant to national security when they occur. To do so will require adequate funding, intelligence analysts with advanced training in science and technology, and increased collaboration with the scientific community, particularly academia. A recent article written by James Giordano, titled "Weaponising the Brain: Neuroscience Advancement Sparks Debate," went on to say, these include the use of various drugs and forms of neurotechnology such as neurofeedback, transcranial electrical and magnetic stimulation, and perhaps even implantable devices for training and performance optimization of intelligence and combat personnel. Brain-computer interfaces could be used to control aircraft, boats, or unmanned vehicles. Military and warfare uses also entail the development and engagement of agents such as drugs, microbes, toxins, and devices as weapons, also called neuroweapons, to affect the nervous system and modify opponents' thoughts, feelings, senses, actions, health, or, in some cases, to incur lethal consequences. The use of neuroscience and technology to optimize the performance of military personnel could potentially lead to the creation of super soldiers. This remains a provocative and contentious issue. If we start to incorporate brain-computer interfacing, could it be that humans might become an artificial intelligence in the end? Maybe the idea is to create a similar but non-intrusive way of achieving this, or even what IBM recently reported on what is theoretically known as strong artificial intelligence. Strong artificial intelligence, also known as artificial general intelligence or AGI, or general AI, is a theoretical form of AI used to describe a certain mindset of AI development. If researchers are able to develop strong AI, the machine would require an intelligence equal to humans. It would have a self-aware consciousness that has the ability to solve problems, learn, and plan for the future. Strong AI aims to create intelligent machines that are indistinguishable from the human mind. But just like a child, the AI machine would have to learn through input and experiences, constantly progressing and advancing its abilities over time. Military applications of neuroscience are unlikely from additional basic research alone, according to Dr. Christopher Green. Due to funding issues, on August the 11th, 2008, Dr. Green went on to say that basic science funding is likely to stay stable and little serious research will delve into the psychopharmacology of interrogation. Thus, a vector that we may wish to explore is the new idea from several global laboratories that indicate culture matters in the decision to use any military application of a symmetric force. Battlefield commanders of all nations hold sacrosanct the right to determine the applications that may cause harm to those outside the bandwidth of a lethal dose 99+ weapon, and generally don't intend to develop for use materials that could cause collateral harm to civilians and non-combatants. If governments or scientists were to try to develop a system to pre-screen neuroscientific cognitive manipulators, which would be HIPAA approved and tested and robust in its core science, success would be as likely as it was with mines and cluster bombs, meaning not likely. And if we did have such success, our enemies of the future would not care. One might ask, what has this to do with UAP? One key factor is how electromagnetic spectrum and its effect on both the human mind and body, as well as human brainwaves that militarily could be weaponized. Research involving UAP experiencers, which includes the near-field effects of UAP, the more recently reported Havana syndrome, the U.S. Embassy in Moscow that was being targeted by the Soviets using microwave beams as far back as the 1970s, along with workers that may be working on technology and classified environments such as radar, as exemplified by Dr. Christopher Kit Green. The effects are also key when utilizing new powerful weapons. The following excerpt is reported from the National Defense University Press. On October 8, 2021, the Helping America Victims Afflicted by Neurological Attacks Act was signed into law by President Joe Biden. Public Law 117-46 authorizes payment to personnel of the Central Intelligence Agency who incur qualifying injuries to the brain, and payment to personnel of the Department of State who incur similar injuries. As of August 2022, initial payments of up to $187,000 have been authorized for those State Department employees affected by AHI Havana syndrome. Although this law admirably addresses potential compensation to the U.S. government personnel affected by Havana syndrome, a definitive determination of the cause of this syndrome remains elusive 6 years after its first occurrence. As noted, cases have continued during recent years. Hostile governments have previously subjected American embassy buildings to microwave radiation, demonstrating a willingness to subject U.S. personnel to surreptitious energy sources that may cause deleterious health effects. Until there is a consensus as to the precise cause of and methods to prevent or treat Havana syndrome, it will likely remain an enigma and health concern for diplomatic, intelligence, and military personnel globally. We have progressed considerably from attributing AHI Havana syndrome to noises caused by indigenous crickets. Yet the problems of identifying its origin and possibly perpetrators remain unsolved. Until answers are found, it remains undetermined if foreign actors have developed an indigenous method for hampering our overseas diplomatic missions, or if perhaps foreign postings in and of themselves contribute to the cause. Clarity on the cause and of treatment for the syndrome is now a U.S. government priority. As Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has stated, we will get to the bottom of this, and meanwhile, we will do everything we can to care for our people. Question: if history repeats itself militarily, could it just end up being what they have, we must have? and therefore research and development toward both the method and the countermeasures of said Havana syndrome should be set in motion to ensure that it does not happen again, or publicly, for now. Is it best to ignore it and suggest that there is no Havana syndrome? So where does this leave those injured or psychologically affected by a near-field exposure to a UAP? Some might be compensated, some already have, or moving forward, will there just be another case of nothing to see here? What about the other effects described by witnesses in close proximity or near-field exposure? According to Dr. Christopher Green, contact effects at these frequencies negate any conclusions as to wavelength effect. Coupling may not occur in a traditional sense of induced current or voltage causing cell transport effects. Maybe that is what Dr. Green was suggesting when describing some of the effects John Burroughs was exposed to. That is, non-ionizing radiation of mixed frequencies. An interesting hypothesis worthy of investigation. Dr. Green continues. The chronicity of neuropsychiatric and paucity of acute neurological signs continue to support the hypothesis of a narrow HF through EHF non-ionizing radio frequency band of exposure. Let's not forget that application of the microwave hearing technology could facilitate private message transmission. It may be useful to provide a disruptive condition to a person not aware of the technology. Not only might it be disruptive to the sense of hearing, it could be psychologically devastating if one suddenly heard voices within one's head. Bioeffects of selected non-lethal weapons. INSCOM, U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command, 17th of February, 1998. In a thesis by Mohammed Jamil, written for Psychological Scales, November 19, 2022, available online, goes on to suggest that the microwave auditory effect, also known as the microwave hearing effect or the fray effect, consists of audible clicks induced by pulsed or modulated microwave frequencies. The clicks are generated directly inside the human head without the need of any receiving electronic device. The effect was first reported by persons working in the vicinity of radar transponders during World War II. During the Cold War era, the American neuroscientist Alan H. Frey studied this phenomenon and was first to publish information on the nature of the microwave auditory effect. Pulsed microwave radiation can be heard by some workers. The irradiated personnel perceive auditory sensations of clicking or buzzing. The cause is thought to be thermoelastic expansion of portions of the auditory apparatus. Competing theories explain the results of interferometric holography tests differently. In 2003 and 2004, the Waveband Corp had a contract from the U.S. Navy for the design of an MAE system they called Medusa, intended to remotely, temporarily incapacitate personnel. The project was canceled in 2005. A recent article by Fortean Winds interviewed Stanford professor of pathology, Dr. Gary Nolan. The author cites, "He is especially well suited to the task of analyzing people who come into contact with UAP, as he is the founder of 8 biotech companies and listed among Stanford's top 25 inventors. It's fortunate he chose to spend the last 10 years looking into cases of people who have been affected by their proximity to UFOs, as they don't have anywhere else to turn." Most people won't even believe they came into contact with something anomalous, much less their health has been negatively impacted. Yet, Dr. Nolan describes some of their injuries to Vice as if they had stood close to an electrical transformer. Quote, so close it fried your insides while leaving your outsides looking relatively unharmed, close quote. Dr. Nolan states a quarter of the patients died from their injuries. The patients who died had symptoms similar to those of people affected by Havana syndrome. Yet, Havana syndrome is assumed to be caused by a malicious state actor with an energy weapon, not flying saucers. Thus, we find a disconnect. Why would some cases of UFO UAP look like Havana syndrome and others not? 3 possibilities. A malicious state actor is using technology similar to energy emitted by UAP in order to harm individuals. All of these individuals are being affected by UAP. Unknown origins and pilots. A state actor using a maser, a microwave emitting laser, or similar device on some individuals, and others are being affected by UAP. Of these 3 possibilities, the second is, perhaps, most concerning, as the motive and culprit would remain completely mysterious, although the third possibility seems most likely based on the evidence. Dr. Nolan appeared on the Theory of Everything podcast and clarified his statement. He estimated 15% of the cases he and others encountered appeared to have a unique effect, like related to UAP. The other 85% of cases could have been caused by malicious individuals. Those other 85% of cases were caused by an abundance of electromagnetic energy we as humans can produce, such as X-rays, gamma rays, and microwaves. That does not mean that they were not caused by UAP. It means we cannot rule out human intervention prima facie. Given the proximity of victims such as Thomas Winterton to the phenomenon, it seems likely to us his injury was caused by the phenomenon. That's not a stretch. It just happened to be waves we can produce which caused it. So to be clear, from the Fortean Wind's point of view, all of the Havana syndrome cases in which the target is not a potential victim of a state actor should be considered potential victims of UAP phenomenon proximity. Dr. Christopher Green has been a go-to guy for the U.S. government and UAP brain damage for a long time, he told the Daily Mail. He believed some of the injuries he had seen arose from patients being too close to subtle, highly powered, highly modulated microwaves, and suggested in his study that soldiers could have been accidentally hit with powerful radio or electromagnetic frequencies from the propulsion system of these strange hovering and rapidly moving aircraft. Dr. Green was the author of the paper Clinical, Medical, Acute, and Subacute Field Effects on Human Dermal and Neurological Tissues, which was authorized as a part of a $22 million Pentagon program into the study of UFOs. Dr. Green said he dealt with hundreds of patients who were injured or died after contact with UFO/UAP. In January of 2022, the U.S. intelligence community, with different levels of confidence, agreed Havana syndrome was not being caused by a foreign or state actor and had yet to determine a specific source. At what point do we connect the dots? As to the materials Dr. Nolan has been analyzing, he stated the following to Vice, quote, "Mostly, there's nothing unusual about them, except everywhere you look in the metal, the composition is different, which is odd. It's what we call inhomogeneous. That's a fancy way of saying incompletely mixed. The common thing about all the materials that I've looked at so far, and there are about a dozen, is that almost none of them are uniform. They are all these hodgepodge mixtures. Each individual case will be composed of similar sets of elements, but they will all be inhomogeneous, close quote. From the Fortean Wind's point of view, this looks like something is putting things together on the fly. The inhomogeneous metal might indicate something which transitions from a state of energy to a solid state of matter, and is sometimes sloppy while doing it. Other samples Dr. Nolan examined showed truly anomalous materials. Elements put together in ways human science, as we know it, cannot. Again, we see an odd mix of abilities that appear to be far beyond us, but also possibly disorganized and haphazard. This should go without saying, but flying saucers and paranormal phenomenon should be avoided until we know more about them. It's an energy we don't yet understand. You wouldn't poke your finger into an electrical transformer, right? Same amount of energy in those weird little flying objects. Hello and welcome to another edition of the post-show panel for Phenomenon Radio, the Weaponisation of UAP. I'm Ray Hobbs. Want to thank all of you for joining us. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting the show. And, we took a deep dive again into a lot of the mental aspects and physical aspects of the weaponization of UAP. We really have to center all of this around our colleague and friend, John Burroughs. Welcome to the show, John.
Welcome.
He has been, the primary witness to the Rendlesham Bentwaters event in 1980, and he himself was exposed to a UAP in very, very close proximity, and he is sort of our chief of this team, in everything that we're doing here. James Warrow, welcome to the program, brother.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Our title researcher. Yeah. Our title researcher, our archivist, the brain behind running down all of this data and collecting all of this data, all of his life in this subject. We are second to none out there when it comes to top tier researchers. And then our filmmaker, our resident professor, Simon Holland. Welcome to
Greetings.
You guys, we really stroked down the path this go round with a good deal of data on the human effects, the effects on human biological tissues. Again, we talk about Dr. Green quite a bit in this episode, and rightfully so. Show 5 drives right through the heart of the UAP phenomenon. It really doesn't give, we could do this for 5-6 hours straight, easily, with everything that James and John have compiled, and the work that Simon and I add to the program. Just scratch the surface of the subject that, really baffles us all in this day. These objects appear out of nowhere, and they maneuver in ways that defy our known laws of physics, and they affect the witnesses and the observers in many different ways. And I think confusion is the best descriptive word that describes most encounters. So, John, I'm going to go to you first, because you are one of those observers. You are one of those witnesses. You are one of those, you could even call it a victim in some cases, because for you, I want to know what your medical interests were that followed your encounter at Bentwaters in 1980, and what are the notable physical effects to your body after the event up to this point?
Well, when it first happened, I had no idea what we were dealing with. So, over the years, I started having heart issues, eye issues, not feeling well, which ended up later on coming to fruition and proving out that, based off declassified documents and other things, that the heart issue, which I didn't have coming into the military, and showed his ugly head right after the event were related to what this declassified Condign document said was UAP radiation, which ties somewhat into terrorist radiation, which also would be what affected my eyes, because when I was examined, when I started having eye issues, the first thing the doctor asked me, a specialist, was, have I been exposed to radiation? And what this all leads to is the fact that I have eye issues with a small tear in my eye wall. So whatever we encountered during that 3-day event did affect me health-wise.
Let me ask you this. Like right after it happened, like in the days that followed, how long was it before you saw a physician of any kind for any physical problems?
Well, the diagnosis came 5 months later, but the actual not feeling well was I didn't feel the greatest after the event. So the whole time frame through January through July, before they discovered the murmur, that I just didn't feel right. I can't even explain how. I just seemed more tired. I just didn't have the energy and the perk that I had. I mean, again, hindsight is the fact that I should have probably pushed more about what we were exposed to. But back then, I just was told it was being looked at. No one raised any concerns about our health. And even though I didn't feel well, I didn't really think about or attribute why I didn't feel well to what happened to us. I can't explain why, other than I just didn't.
So, yeah. Suffice it to say that after the event, after these 3-4 days that this all went down, no military or DOD physicians or anybody called you in to ask you any questions or pose any questions to you, or sort of review what happened and ask you how you were feeling or anything like that?
Okay, for me personally, again, just like people said they were brought in and interrogated, which I have no recollection of. I remember writing a statement, turning it in. I don't remember being examined, but other people do. So that's the best I could tell you. I have no memory of anything further than being asked to write a statement, which I did, meeting with the wing staff, or do I have any memory of being examined by a medical doctors until they found a heart murmur, which was a civilian doctor. And at that point, I went back to the base with that diagnosis, and they sent a doctor from Wright-Patterson in. He examined me, and from that point, immediately had me go up to Wright-Patterson for a bunch of tests. So as soon as the military, the part I remember was as soon as the civilians identified my issue, the military jumped right into it. And they ended up sending me to Wright-Patterson, which is interesting if you know the history of Wright-Patterson. So, which I didn't, again, at the time. I mean, this is all stuff that back then we didn't have the internet, we didn't have the coverage. There was no talk about anybody. Well, I should say that Cash Landrum happened. So after Cash Landrum, I guess, I don't know how long it was afterwards, they started saying they didn't feel well and had health issues. But I didn't at first attribute any of my issues to that. I had no idea why a perfectly healthy person that came in the Air Force, me, all of a sudden developed a major heart murmur, which makes no sense. Nor did the military actually give me a reason why. The answer I got from Wright-Patterson was, you had these issues and we're going to monitor them going forward.
Right. And of course, eye problems as well.
Look, that came a little later. I mean, that came a few months afterwards, but yes.
Yeah, but I mean, that's months. That's not like years.
Well, no, I didn't even feel well afterwards. So
you didn't have any eye problems going into the military.
No, and then I didn't have a tear in my eye wall. I'm just telling you.
Right. So, let me ask you something real quick before we move on. Now, there's some conversation, and I get this a lot because people know we're friends, and they're like, they ask me that I get a myriad of questions. Everybody reaching out to me wanting to get John Burroughs on their show and all of that. But this question comes up quite often, where there was talk about Colonel Halt or somebody's, I think it was Halt, that said, that John Burroughs seems to attract these things or bring these things in. while this event was going on. Does that make any sense to you?
Well, okay, so this is where I have to be clear. In the hypnosis, that comes out. So, but again, it's not from memory, it's from the hypnotic
Right.
hypnosis, where it says they want Hall in the hypnosis. I repeat that he says they wanted us here, they wanted you here, they've been communicating with us. So that came out of my hypnosis, not from memory, from Hall or myself.
Okay, thanks for clearing that one up, because that one I get a lot. About that, like, because it would suggest that Hall had knowledge, like, of something that everyone else didn't.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
John, that's really interesting what you just said, and thanks for going over your symptoms and the history of your symptoms. Today, you seem to be the focus of attention. The Air Force and the military want you. I believe that they see you as holding a clue, a key to what actually happened. When did that change? When did you become suddenly approached by the top echelons, the Kit Greens and the other people who are interested in you, and the Wright Patterson people, was there a moment when suddenly you realized that they were very interested in you because of your symptoms?
Well, after we testified, Pat Frascogna, myself, Peniston, and Nick Pope did a panel, or they did a hearing, a citizens hearing, and we did 2 sessions with ex-members of Congress that were pretty moved by the fact that my records were classified. I provided proof that they were. Right. In fact, when they broke between session 1 and 2, one of the guys on the panel from Utah made a few phone calls and was just shocked that this was taking place. And they actually put in a letter, they all signed it, to send it to the VA and to President Obama, which, by the way, I did get some files released, and the letter from President Obama, going to President Obama, ended back up in my VA file. So that started some interest there. Kit Green came forward shortly afterwards, met with Pat, and said there was a government or a funded study that was going on looking into DNA and to the effects on the mind itself. So that started this decade-long thing of DNA, the mind stuff, as far as an MRI. Also, interest in Congress that they actually reached out to me to talk to them about it. There will be an article, I think, Sunday in the Roswell Daily Record that's going to come out, and it's going to go over all this, including documentation to show and talk about that Congress did reach out to me, and there has been interest in the overall what happened at Rendlesham and myself directly.
So that's going to be on Sunday, May the 7th. For everyone who watches this podcast after its live presentation, on Sunday, May 7th, it's supposed to be in the Roswell Daily Record, the storied Roswell Daily Record. Thanks, Professor Simon. That was a fantastic question, as always. We went at it in this edition, and once again, we talked extensively about Dr. Kit Green, and who is clearly DOD's go-to physician specialist for morbidity and mortality, right? And he conducted extensive studies on the effects to the human body from different forms of radiation, including non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation. James, you have uncovered and collected a large amount of scientific data, a vast amount up to this point, on acute and subacute field effects on human biological tissues even. And I want to know what your thoughts are on the effects of radiation to the human body, since your research began into this subject of UAP so long ago.
Well, bringing it up to the present day, what needs to be addressed is neurotransmitters within the brain itself. Neurotransmitters are basically they're chemical messengers that our body needs, and it cannot do without. It cannot function without. Their job's literally to carry messages, chemical signals, messages from one neuron to the next target cell, which are nerve cells. The nerve cells can be a muscle cell or a gland. The fact that John's heart was affected interested me in the fact that the heart itself is a muscular organ made up mostly of cardiac muscle. And also to note that as messengers of synaptic transmission, neurotransmitters also play a critical role in cognitive as well as emotional behaviour. Now, non-ionizing electromagnetic waves, obviously they include many things: ultraviolet visible region, infrared microwave, all the stuff that we use in sort of daily life, especially radio frequency electromagnetic fields for communications, and also extremely low frequency extremely low frequency waves, and they can be generated via electricity. Now, a lot of these fields, basically, they're sort of referred to as microwave radiation. So, and then that's where looking into microwave radiation effects, started a little bit of an eye opener for myself. The effects of this electromagnetic radiation field that comes from UAP seems to depend on the frequency and the intensity and the power of the radiation that stems from these UAP. So far as I can tell, it seems that the possible cause of some of these injuries are due to high levels of microwave radiation field that are affecting the neurotransmitters within the self, and they can also at the same time cause heating of body tissues, resulting in skin burns and things like that. So basically, the closer you get to this UAP, it seems that the more potential damage to the actual individual exposure levels. But what I found interesting was that John seemed to have been apparently exposed to these types of fields on 2 nights, not just one, but 2 nights. And there was on the 3rd night, we know about Adrian Bustenza. He himself was injured. He was far away from the UAP compared to John's proximity. His injuries seemed to be burns and things on the hands and stuff like that. And I couldn't, and I cannot grasp how John Burroughs himself could get that close to something of that field intensity and still be talking to this day, and again, Dr. Green brings up he's a chat that he had with Annie Jacobson, and his original hypothesis was that people like John and others have been exposed to technology from black programs. He suggested that advanced state-of-the-art high-energy technologies developed in special access programs, including non-lethal weapons, holograms, cloaking devices, and drones. But he also went on to say that he has no idea of how any of these programs that he was aware of back in the day can do these sorts of things. So that leaves a question, that we're all looking for. What was it that they were exposed to? What is this UAP?
Can I add to that, please?
Please do, John.
There's
please.
a few things that can stand out. I supposedly went into it both nights, which nobody else did. The other factor was Adrian on night 3 actually had it touch his hand in just the front part where I went in, and he said I disappeared. Kit Green actually wrote a paper that was declassified, that was the DIA had, that actually talked about biological effects. So that paper actually was classified until it was declassified through FOIA. But that paper and 37 other papers were presented to Senator John McCain's committee while he was still alive. And part of what they were presenting was the ability to go further with exotic technology. And you could go under exotic technology. Are you saying it's UFO technology? That's a good question, but it actually was looked at as their point of view as exotic technology, the future of war. So that all plays into all this, and those documents are there, and they really did go forward with McCain after he got read in through my case, and I got my settlement, and that's one of the things that'll be discussed in the newspaper article. And the other factors why I probably survived was after I had my surgery. The what do they call it, Professor, when they do after they look at your tissue after the surgery?
Yeah, biopsy or
whatever you call it. They did look at it, and that's how they got my DNA, tissue DNA, not only blood but tissue. But in it, a leaflet a valve has two leaflets, one inside, one out. I actually had two leaflets on the inside. And what they speculated was the two leaflets protected me from having just one damaged so bad I would have died.
Wow.
So if I hadn't had the two leaflets, which is rare, which is discussed in this article, I wouldn't have made it. I would have died out there that night. So.
Wow.
And you know, your medical records are still sealed up and locked away, and no civilians are going to be able to get to them. And
they won't even let, like, if I got sick, because the way the VA is, especially in certain locations, you have to have civilian doctors, like emergency room or something like that. Even when I got sick last time, one of the procedures before I was discharged was to do an echo on the heart, and the VA refused to allow the civilian doctor to do it. I had to go back down to a VA facility to have it done. So,
yeah. Also, in this edition of the program, we dive into the electromagnetic spectrum and its effects on both the human mind and body, and then also as well as the brain and the brain waves. And everybody just about has heard about Havana syndrome, and which we talked about in this program. Professor Simon, give us your take on the link between human UAP exposure and military weaponization.
Race, that is such a good question. And my answer is, I have no idea. But that's exactly what drew me into this whole team and very much contacting John Burroughs, because when I read the British MOD Condign report, long before meeting John and yourself and James, I was amazed. There, in this MOD document, which was made specifically to brief future members of Parliament if the MOD ever were asked questions about UAP, is a lookup table of human health effects of exposure to UFOs, UAP, and electromagnetic radiation. And I thought, hang on a minute, why are they doing that? You know, it was an extensive survey, every single effect out of possibly a survey of hundreds of service people, probably, or laboratory experiments. How are humans actually affected with exposure to high levels of EM, non-ionizing radiation, and more interestingly for me, the exposure to high levels of plasma radiation, just standing next to glowing balls of plasma. And they did that survey, and it was an eye-opener. So when I then futurely got in touch with John Burroughs, I realized that John Burroughs is the key. Because if we understand what John Burroughs was exposed to, what he stood next to, what he was enveloped with in Rendlesham Forest in 1980, we can understand, I hope, what it was that actually occurred on those fateful nights. And that's fascinating, because still encoded in John's body, inside his DNA, and sadly with his actual real physical injuries, his heart valve explosion, his tearing, as he told us tonight, of his retina, it's all exactly clues to what he was too close to. And I find that is a way of unlocking the mystery of what UAP might be, and has it been weaponized? John's exposure took place on a military base. You know, something was going on. Was it highly strange, or was it highly strange and augmented by humans? And that is exactly what we are, as a team, are exploring.
You know, this entire show is just one part of a series.
Right.
And Simon, this, how deep this goes, we can only imagine. But I can tell you this, just like we said earlier, John Burroughs' medical records are still sealed. They're still locked away. They're still classified. Right. What is the reason why he will never be able to see the medical records from back then that that belonged to him? I mean, correct. What would be the reason to lock them away from him and his positions? Do you think?
Exactly. No, exactly. And what James Warrow has discovered, and something that I've been also researching, is that this interest in electromagnetic directed energy weapons and plasma research predated Rendlesham Forest incident. There's laboratories all over the world working on this as a potential weapon system. Now, what the origin of it is, I still don't know. You know, are the weaponization people looking at the highly strange, the extraterrestrial, the force of nature, the unknown bit of physics? But I absolutely know, and it was revealed in the Condon report, is that research has been done on the exposure to humans and how it could be a weapon.
Well, that's a fact. And, you know, the medical records could very well be locked away because of just that. You know, this is information leading up to, or the test of, or, you know, just luckily a capture of this kind of technology. And we don't want it getting out. So, Professor Simon, another great episode. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Race.
You absolutely. We'll see you again next week for sure. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank James Warrow. I want to thank John Burroughs. I want to thank Professor Simon Holland. What a group of guys to work with. Top notch in everything they're doing. And I'm just a small cog in the wheel. I do the voice for this stuff. I host the program, and I'm good friends with these guys, and I'm lucky to be here. The search for the weaponization of UAPs and the military aspects and the realities, the cold, hard facts of this phenomenon come forth in every episode that we bring. So thank you all again. I'm Race Hobbs. Have a great night and a great weekend.